You're listening to A Seat at the Tech Table, a podcast by Sisters in Tech, hosted by Anna and Esther Kofarigi. This podcast highlights the experiences of Black women working and thriving in the tech industry. You'll learn about how they found their paths into tech, and hopefully you'll be inspired to consider whether there's a seat for you at the tech table.
Welcome, Jessica.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Okay, so we would love you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sounds good. Hi, folks. My name is Jessica Udo. I am Nigerian, born and raised. Shout out. I currently am based out of Vancouver, Western Canada, and I work for Microsoft as a program manager on an internal data insights platform. I've also recently been elected as the chair for the Africans at Microsoft Employee Network, and that kind of goes to show my interest in making impact on the continent, which I also do volunteering my time with the African Impact Initiative. I'm going to pause there. But yeah, that's me.
Excited to jump into each and every one of those things. I'll hand over to Anna.
Yeah, so you've given us a little bit about your background, but tell us a bit more. How did you develop an interest into tech?
Oh, that's a funny one. For me, it was the cliche, growing up, my dad had this one desktop computer. And I think at the time we were mostly playing games or doing something on Excel that felt like playing games. And then, uncles and aunties would always be like, she should go into computers and software and tech. And to be fair, I didn't really know what it was per se at the time. But over time, high school, took some computer studies classes. And then when it was time to apply for university, I just applied. I think at the time my dream was, hey, let's go work in Silicon Valley and work for Microsoft and Google, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it was that cliche, people seeing the potential in you, which although cliche is very key, especially in developing a child's interest and esteem. And, I think that was my turning point, I guess, for my interest in tech.
That's super interesting. I want to dig into that a little bit. So you spoke about having a computer at home, but how do you make that connection? So having a computer in the home, connecting to all of these tech companies that exist in the world, like how did that become real to you?
Man, I feel like it's really funny because at the time that one computer was everything. And I feel like that might show my age a bit, but I imagine most people listening are probably in the same Gen Z generation or, millennials. But yeah, just seeing how using a computer was so opening in terms of connecting with people and connecting with the world and doing things that you couldn't do as easily before. To be fair, with my dad's computer, and I don't think there was as much penetration in high schools at the time or even primary schools. But luckily, my school had computer classes, and I remember it being interesting because the class would ask things like label a keyboard or a monitor. And I was just like, can we learn about how this was built? And anyway, I don't want to insult the academic program I went through. But that being said, I think for me, it just sparked a curiosity that I wanted to learn more. I wanted to see more, to do more. And knowing that this was one tool to doing that was really exciting at the time.
So you've kind of spoken a little bit about your school, how that kind of impacted your journey into your interest in tech. But did your academic background play a role in developing your interests?
Yeah, I think for me it was less my academic background and more my non-academic interests And I'm saying that to say that, a lot of the courses I took were the same courses most people were taking, physics. I mean, most science students were taking math, physics, chemistry, as well as some social sciences courses, of course. But at the same time, I think for me, it was really those summer, boot camp type things that I forced my dad to take me for. Learning how to use Microsoft Word and Excel at home, which at the time felt like a game, or even just some random computer games that, there are whole studies on how games help with the child's development, right? So I'd say that really was what veered me on that path much more than my actual academic background. At least pre-university anyway, so.
Cool. So what did you study at university? What was that experience?
Yeah, so I ended up going in for software engineering. And midway, I switched to electrical because at the time, there was a running joke in my family that the best engineers, the best software engineers or founders did not study software engineering. I don't fully agree with that, but eventually I did electrical and software because I wanted something else in my belt. And yeah, I went to McGill. It's right there in the background. Shout out McGill students, wherever you are. It's in Quebec, in Canada. It's a great school. Yeah.
Cool. And I'm really intrigued by people's university experiences, especially studying the computer sciences, the software engineering and electrical engineering. How did that prepare you, or how did that kind of maybe inspire you to maybe take this route, or if it didn't? I'd love to know that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely did. And I think it's very on theme that the name of this podcast is A Seat at the Tech Table with Sisters in Tech. But I think for me, the interest in tech was already there, right? So the thing that I felt my tech degree showed more was the disparity in gender in tech. And when I look at a lot of my eventual life ambitions, they kind of stemmed from that place of, this is what my experience was like, and this is why I want to bring more representation and more inclusion and more kind of trust in often overlooked people or founders or engineers, right? So I loved my program. That's not to say I didn't. And I think the fact that there were very few women meant that we're all very close. So I would not necessarily take that back. But of course, it's always better if you feel, more represented. So, yeah.
No, we definitely understand that, and it's definitely a motivation for this podcast. So yeah, thank you for sharing. I guess I'd love to know kind of the end of your university career. So you're about to embark upon the big world. How do you feel like your university prepared you to enter the jobs market? And do you feel like your skills were kind of immediately transferable at that point?
Yeah, I mean, my initial response is yes. And I think I'm going to slow down a bit and think this through, especially because I know, there is an ongoing conversation around, especially for tech, around micro degrees versus university degrees. So I want to be, I guess, as, I wouldn't say cautious, but more holistic when I answer this question. Yes, it prepared me. I think, especially given the fact that it wasn't just building myself academically, but building myself as a person, moving so far away from home and learning to be self-sufficient and learning how to work in groups and how to ask for help and, be disciplined and responsible, et cetera, et cetera. And then with regards to the courses, I feel like maybe 5% was transferable. And not in a bad way, just my major was electrical, right? And now I'm a product manager in a software company. So even if I studied software, I'm not a software programmer, right? So even that in itself would not be fully transferable. But, university did teach me how to learn, and it did teach me how to work in groups, work in projects, how to think through assignments. And I think especially for PMs, that is such an interesting skill, right? Because I think as a programmer, technology stack changes a lot, yes, but you can get to that point where, you're fully confident. This is my stuff. I know what I'm doing. Boom. As a PM, you could be confident in your product skills, but you can't really be confident about the product, right? Because you're always trying to innovate, and innovating means you need to be curious. It means you need to talk to people other than yourself, your wise old self. And I think that skill of being open to learn and grow is something that, amongst my life experiences, university really helped me with. Because, we all had those courses that it seemed good and you understood what was going on. And then you see the test or the project or the assignment and you're just like, what is this? So from that point of view, I think there were some transferable skills from university to the workforce. Yeah.
Also, so right after university, what was your first job?
Microsoft as a program manager.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a funny story.
Okay, tell us a bit about how you got your job.
Yeah, that is a funny story. I think that, and this is pretty interesting because I once, quite recently, maybe 6 months ago, went to a career coach, and she said, perhaps you have to dream bigger in terms of what I want for my career, which, I wouldn't necessarily get into all the conversations, but I had told her the story of graduating and, in my head, I was going to get a job in tech and then go for an MBA and then find myself in Silicon Valley somehow at Microsoft or Google. And I've said those two a lot, but there are lots of other great tech companies. And then somehow I got the job right after university. And then I met this career coach and I was like, what do I do now? How did I get the job? It was pretty much just God. I don't know if this is a platform for that, but
Always the platform, always.
I remember even just the entire process and how it came together. I'd gone for an event organized by a group on campus called POWI, promoting opportunities for women in engineering. And I went for this event with Microsoft office in Montreal, and I saw people that I had gone to school with, in Microsoft shirt.
Wow.
And I'm just like, if you could get the job, maybe I should apply. Like, at the very least, I should put in an application, right? But of course, at this time, I'm just like, nah, it's no way, it's not gonna happen. So I applied. I think the deadline was even that night. So it was very...
Wow.
But the good thing is Microsoft doesn't ask for, at least at the time, didn't ask for a cover letter. So it wasn't like I had, 6 hours to put together this amazing application. It was just a CV, which was amazing because I was like, thank you. So yeah, I applied for an entry-level engineering position. And I think the interviews were scheduled within 2 weeks. So I didn't even have enough time to prepare. So that's why I'm like, yeah, God was really doing his thing. So yeah, I have that interview. I think based on how I answered the questions, the interviewer had asked if I had considered any of the product/program roles. And this was kind of the first time I was hearing of that at Microsoft. So I knew there were PMs. I just always imagined that there were people that got MBAs and had been in tech for years. I wasn't aware at the time that there were entry-level PM roles at Microsoft. So that was interesting to me. I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And then I had like another 2 weeks to prepare for that interview, learning about PM for the first time, right? So, you know, it all came together really well, because to be fair, that was entirely my favorite interview. They fly you out, they keep you in a hotel, obviously pre-COVID. Apologies to everyone applying now. And it's a circuit of meeting with different people, different PMs, and I think that leading up to that, you know, just knowing how much I wasn't prepared and how much I had to rely on, because given little time to prepare, right, I had to rely on my innate self. Like, okay, you've got this, you're smart, you've been through McGill, you know, like, you know what you're doing, don't get too nervous. And obviously my network, right? So even just applying, I had reached out to the person I saw at the event. I said, hey, how did you do this? Like, I want to work here too, bro. And even just the interview as well, right? Reaching out to people that had the title on LinkedIn and having conversations with them. I think that I wouldn't recommend that to anybody who asks me about jobs right now. I'll always say, you know, do your thing, research, buy the Cracking the PM interview book. It worked for me because I don't know what was happening, but yeah, that was my story.
I think that's such an inspiring story, really, and so many levels. I think the overall story is really interesting because it's one thing I'm always trying to tell people to do is just to put yourself in the game slightly. So you applied for one role, but you, through that role, you went on a journey into another role. And I think that's a part of so many people's stories, that you think you're going in one direction, but what you're really doing is your momentum is taking you forward, and then you find another direction as you're going. But if you didn't apply for any of them, you wouldn't have got any of them. So I think that's a really powerful message to take from. The other thing I love, and I think we talk about it a lot, is you just spoke about kind of reaching out to your network, whether it's that person you saw at the event, people you know kind of from your extended network, and also kind of just reaching out on LinkedIn to people who had that title and seeing if you could connect with them. I'd love for you to talk a bit more about kind of the power of the network. I think that's what we call it. But yeah, it's so true.
Yeah, no, that is very, very key. And I think that most people want to help, right? I don't necessarily mean, or rather, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has the capacity to help, right? Because if someone doesn't reply me on LinkedIn, my initial thought is not, this person hates me. It's more, they're too busy to see my message, right? Which I guess is fair. But if they do reply, I think most people, in my experience, want to help. And of course, the hack is to reach out to people who you have something in common with, whether you went to school with them or you know them from someone, because having that in your intro always kind of helps. And I mean, for people like me, if I see another Black female student reaching out to me on LinkedIn, even if it's the worst, I probably shouldn't say this, but even if it's the worst entry message, I will most definitely reply, because I'm just like, I want to create spaces for us. Like, yes, reach out to me. So I guess that's another hack. But that being said, I think the network really helps, even just possibilities of what's like opening your mind up to the possibilities of what's possible. It's very important, because if I hadn't met that person at school, you know, in a very random way, I might have seen him at the event and just didn't know or wouldn't know who this guy was, right? But we had taken classes together, we had worked on assignments together. We didn't know that this would eventually translate to this. And I think that's very interesting, because people always think of networking, or mostly think of networking as like meeting people who are above you, who are managers, who are directors, whatever. But there should be an emphasis as well on the vertical aspect of things, because these are the future, you know, managers and directors and CVPs, and it's a lot easier to build those connections now when you're all just in the grind together. So I guess that's the other part of networking that I think is very key, or was very key for me anyway.
So you've kind of mentioned quite a few times the role of a PM. I guess this is more so for people who don't know what that role is. Could you kind of just give a bit of a breakdown to exactly what you do? What does PM stand for, and things along those lines?
Yeah. So I guess when I say PM as a Microsoft employee, the job title says program manager. But for this conversation, I would refer to myself as a product manager rather than program manager. And there is a slight nuance in the actual wording, but my day-to-day is very much a product manager day-to-day. So that's why I'm going to stick to that. Generally, product managers or PMs for short typically are responsible for defining what comes next for a product. So when you think of what new features to roll out, or do we need to do some kind of migration to a new platform or a new experience for our customers, which sometimes is, for innovative purposes, but sometimes it's just some tool is being, discarded or sunsetted, right? So there's a lot of different but similar tasks going on. My day-to-day consists of meeting with customers to understand and clarify some of their requirements, spending some focus time to try to synthesize it all and put together some kind of one-pager or presentation, meeting with my engineering team to discuss what's on our backlog, what's coming up, maybe even get some more insight on what it would take to run a feature. There's also my managers or other stakeholders who often depend on our product, but are not necessarily, I guess this is very rare, but they may not necessarily need a feature right now, but they just need to be kept updated on what's coming up or what it would take to get XYZ in for them. So I would say that I spend a good 80 to 90% in meetings. I try to block out time to work, of course, but that's rare as a PM. There's a lot of meetings, but good meetings, very productive, whether it's scoping stuff out or discussing requirements or user interviewing, design scoping, design thinking, etc., etc.
Cool. Okay, so you've told us a bit about your role. Tell us kind of a bit about your average day. So obviously we're all in we're sort of still in lockdown, or at least in work from home mode, most of us at the minute. I'm not sure if you're all back in the office, but yeah, tell us what kind of a typical day looks like for you.
Yeah, I am working from home right now, thankfully. Just putting that out there. But my day to day, I'd say typically starts out with a 9 a.m. team stand-up, which is mostly an opportunity, for folks to talk about what they're working on, what's top of mind, any blockers, any updates coming, or, big points to discuss, etc. Typically takes less than 30 minutes, except, there's something really big at the time. And then I would say there's probably an hour or two of stakeholder conversations, whether it's meeting with my LT for some feature approval, or presenting an experience review that we're trying to get insights and feedback on, or, people coming and trying to understand what the product does and how they could leverage it for a unique scenario, because that happens a lot, especially for internal products like the one I work on. And then I would say there's probably like another 3 hours of customer conversations, whether that is a new requirement, a new feature, or again, customer demo type meetings. you'll be surprised how often that happens. I think that personally, there's stuff that I may need to work on to reduce that, whether it's better documentation or having videos out there that people could use. But I do personally enjoy meeting with them, so I'm not that pressed. Because, in talking about a feature, you're also getting sentiments on how they like your product, how they use your product, where their head's at in terms of certain features that you're trying to run. Would it be useful for them? So, it's a win-win for both of us. And then I'm guessing there's probably like an hour left-ish. I'll probably spend that time writing emails, putting together spec documents, maybe, I don't know, arranging the backlog, prioritizing features in the backlog, stuff like that. But yeah, that is a very conservative 8 hours. There are lots of non-8-hour days.
Wow.
But I'll stop there.
Okay, we've got a bit of a sense of what a typical day looks like. But what would you say your workplace culture looks like? Or what is your workplace culture?
Yeah, no, disclaimer, Microsoft is a huge company, so everyone's experience might not be the same. But I'd say for myself, it's pretty good in the sense that, before the pandemic as well, but especially with the pandemic, lots of people are more empathetic. And I'd say maybe because I work on an internal product also, there's a lot more flexibility around a lot of things. But that being said, lots of people are very empathetic. There is, although most people would admit that they work more than 8 hours, yikes, it's not encouraged. It's not encouraged at all. In fact, sometimes I message my manager past 5 p.m. and she just would not reply until the next day. And I know she's online. I know you're online. But she just doesn't want me to feel like it's required, right, for my job. I also think something else that's really key is the collaboration. I don't think there are many people who work isolated, especially on product teams. And one of the big things that Microsoft encourages is, I forget how it's phrased right now, but it's the whole idea of building from the work of others or building something that impacts other people. Like when I say people, I don't mean customers, I mean other teams within the company or within your product group. Because that reduces the amount of duplicate effort that goes into stuff significantly. And if you think of the fact that you're working at one of the best companies in the world, with some of the best minds, why would you not want to, speak with them? So yeah, there's that culture of just bouncing ideas off people, whether it's like a quick 30 minutes meeting, unofficially or even just officially as a mentor. That happens too a lot. So it's a great work culture for me, and at least for my product team. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I feel like there's more I could say.
Yeah, that's definitely, it's definitely good to hear.
Yeah.
I just want to, if you're happy to, and it's fine if you can't speak too much, but if you could tell us a bit about your product and the product that you work on and the nature of it and what it's like to work on that kind of product.
Yeah. So the product I work on is a data insights platform, which is a pipeline of data collectors that pretty much collect data for the entire company, as well as a layer for building ML or just regular automation to derive insights from the data. And it's internal, but it's not necessarily a secret, so I'm fine to talk about it. But right now, obviously, because of how much people are becoming more aware about how data is used, is not a product that will be taken public so easily. I also don't think that many companies that would just be like, you can keep all our data. So taking it public would definitely mean some kind of re-architecture such that whatever data is collected is not tied to Microsoft in any way. and that is a whole beast of itself because this was built for Microsoft, right? But anyway, that's the context there why it's internal. But that being said, I actually wasn't always on this team, and I remember when I made the decision to move, it was very much because I personally felt like data was the future, and I still do. But more particularly, I feel like data is the future for product management. And I have a mentor also at Microsoft who always says that as a PM, obviously it's very important to develop hypotheses. And then how do you test that? By talking to customers. But realistically, especially for a company as big as Microsoft, you can't talk to every customer, right? So the next best thing is to look at the data. But of course, this is very much not necessarily one of those quotes that you just slap on and just follow data blindly. I think this should be taken in context, right? Like, what's the first thing, your hypothesis? Like, it is very hard. And I think that's a mistake people make with data sometimes, to just use that to make very big decisions without understanding the context around the data. So not just where is this data from, I also care about how it was collected. I also care about what the hypothesis you're trying to test is. And you know, for me, I find that if you're able to really put that color and that story around the data, then it makes sense to make decisions based on that. But I've also seen people, especially when you're just starting out and you're just trying to get the hang of data, you know, you see a number and like, oh yeah, that's that, you know, but that's that. And I can give many interesting scenarios. Like, oftentimes we're gauging things and tracking things, and then we ask ourselves, but is this even the best metric to track? Because following this number, you could do X, Y, Z, but is that really the best metric to track? Like, are you sure you shouldn't test like other things? Like, and that's the context and the story and the hypothesis that I think should always be considered along with the data. And I'm trying not to give specific examples because it is all internal, but I guess you kind of get the point, right? Or even just now with all the bias in AI training, right? Because it's all data. It's just, what data is this? Mostly white hetero man. How can you say that that fits the bill for your user base that consists of Blacks, Hispanics, Indigenous folks, queer people, you know? So when I say data is the future, I want to put that with an asterisk, and then all the stuff I just said following that.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important, especially for kind of the product manager role. I think all of us, speak for myself and some others, we need to kind of work on our data muscle and our data understanding muscle, because it is really key to kind of building good products across the board. So thanks so much.
Okay, I just want to pick on something, because you said that you have a mentor. Are you able to tell us a little bit about how that came about and the value of that relationship?
Oh man, I have various mentors, and I encourage people to have various mentors too. But I'm trying to think if it's better to talk about one particular path or just a general, because each one is different, right? So there are mentors that I have that are people that I saw what they were doing and I liked what they were doing, and I thought that there's something specific I want to learn from them. Especially the mentor that I'm talking about with data. So he works at Microsoft as well, and on one of our sister teams. And I just observed that whenever he gave presentations or experience reviews, he was very holistic with regard to the data, right? And that was a skill that I thought I wanted to build. So I had a project I was working on at the time for, you know, a feature, and I said, I'd reach out to him and just like have a recurring meeting where we just talk about what we're seeing, what data we could add or incorporate, what kind of telemetry we want to incorporate in the future, or even just how do we use this data to decide on the next thing to do, right? So So I think that's one way to find mentors based on topic areas you want to develop. I also think that there is space for finding mentors based on positions you want to grow to. So if you're a junior PM and you're trying to get to senior or principal, and every company might have a different phrase or word for the levels, but it will be key to have a mentor who has done that journey and who has scaled to the next level or 2 levels above, so that they can tell you and teach you and advise you as you try to get there as well. I think for those ones, pretty similarly, I find someone or I hear of someone who was in the same position and, I just reach out. Again, most people want to help. I don't think every reaching out always works out. Like there are some people you'd meet and they just know that, we just don't have the same rapport. And you can't force those things, right? And it's not to say they're a bad person or you're a bad person. It's just that sometimes you want someone that you can connect with on certain levels and you just can't with this person. And don't get me wrong, this is not about, gender or race or anything. I have very diverse people in my network. But it could be about how you think through things. It could be about how pushy you are on certain things. And it's sometimes good because there are mentors who are very much, teaching you how to stand up for yourself. So there's a fine line there, but maybe for you it's a deal breaker. Maybe you just don't want someone who's always telling you, do this in this particular way. And you're like, hey, can we talk about other things? So yeah, I think for me, those are the general themes of a mentorship that I have found in my experience.
No, thank you so much, because for me, I really did pick up those kind of, I guess, at least 2 types of mentors. So the skill-based mentors, so a skill or capability that you want to kind of develop, and then a position mentor, so the person you want to kind of get to the position of. That's very helpful. So thank you so much for that. I want to track back to something you mentioned right at the beginning. So you said you talked about the Africans at Microsoft group. So and African impact. So let's start with the first one, Africans at Microsoft. Tell us more about that.
Sounds good. Now we're getting into fun stuff. But yeah, Africans at Microsoft is an employee network at Microsoft for Africans at Microsoft or allies. I think right now our membership distribution list is about 1,200 people across multiple continents. There are official chapters in the US, in Canada, Ireland, Lagos, Kenya, South Africa. I feel like I'm missing one more. But there are also unofficial groups who join from various other places, including the UAE and Southern America. So for me, when I joined Microsoft, I wanted to meet, it actually started pretty selfishly. So I had lots of mentors at the time, but I didn't have a Black female mentor. And I just wanted to meet more Black female mentors or tech people. And there are lots of Black female people I know at Microsoft now, especially in the entry level. And at more senior positions, there are fewer of them in tech. There are lots of them in marketing, in finance, account management, etc. But anyway, that's another story. And it's getting better, I would say. I think it's definitely getting better. But at the time I joined, that was the reason why I found the AMSUP group. Anyway, so for me, the community has been there for me when, I was new and fresh-eyed and fresh-faced and wanted to meet people who had shared interests, shared experiences, and, they also host a lot of social events. So it was a fun way to, especially coming from, because I moved from Montreal to Vancouver for my job. So I also wanted to just meet friends, right? And then over time, I was just very involved because I really believed in what they were doing. And this year, as of July, I was elected as chair. So now I've seen that it's not just fun and games. So there is a lot that goes into, a community like that, including how do you show up for people who are going through stuff, whether it's a performance review or having difficulty onboarding in a new role, or, the HR for Microsoft is trying to get more diverse people in their pipeline. And of course, the first people they're going to reach out to are Blacks at Microsoft, Africans at Microsoft. Because as a group, we do have, or we should be the voice for other people, and they could also advise on, okay, this is where we are, and this is where to find us, right? So now I'd say that it's definitely a mix of fun and games, as well as the opportunity to make a real change for, Africans at Microsoft. And I'm just starting out, so I haven't really fully defined what that would be for me yet, but there are a couple ideas. So we shall see. We shall see.
That's super exciting, and congratulations, Ruth, to say, on becoming the chair. We'd also love you to speak a bit about the African Impact Initiative that you mentioned. Yeah, tell us more.
Yeah. So African Impact is a nonprofit consisting of Africans in the diaspora, mostly, who wanted to give back in some way. I feel like a lot of Africans in the diaspora feel this way, where we want to be able to contribute to something on ground, but we're just not sure the best way to go about that. And it actually started out while, the founder was still a university student, right? So for him, it was very much a hill to climb. But that being said, initially it was I don't want to say cliche, but the very common way of fundraising and going back to do a project, whether that is at a hospital or building a clean water borehole in a community, etc., etc. And then we found that it was very hard for these projects to be sustainable. And this probably in part goes to the fact that, I wouldn't say Africa, but Nigeria anyway, has a huge problem with maintenance. There are lots of infrastructure that are built and it looks very, very good, but 2 years, 3 years, and it's just, at least paint the damn thing, So I guess what we eventually transitioned to doing was to empower the people on ground to build these things themselves, because that way we're hoping that they're more inclined to maintain this, because this is not just their own, but could also potentially be their source of living, right? So, if this is where you get your money to feed your family, I think you're, not in a manipulative way, but just in a general human nature way. It's like, this is your project, right? This is yours. So, eventually that also mutated into some kind of fund that invests in often overlooked first-time founders. So we found when we did our own, market analysis, that typical VC funds are looking for people with experience and a very solid track record, because that often indicates that they would return some profit on the investment. Whereas for people who are first-time founders, who are in schools, it's a lot harder to get the money to build. So yeah, that's what we do now, trying to have a more inclusive tech/entrepreneurship space by investing capital as well as capacity building to first-time founders who are often overlooked and often university students as well. At African Impact, I am the program manager, which means that I work with the team to define what our offering for this fund is in terms of what does that capacity building side look like, what key partnerships need to happen, what is in the curriculum to help them refine on their startup, etc., etc. So yeah.
That's amazing work and amazing stuff. And I think it feels like the story of Black women in this tech space that we're never just doing our day job. There's always all the other things. And kind of to that point, how do you rest? How do you kind of take care of yourself in the midst of all of these amazing things that you're doing?
I'm going to answer this question, but I am also going to say something before I say this. I think you're right. I think that especially as a minority in tech, it often feels like the work to change it rests on you in addition to your day job, with which you are sometimes not compensated for, this additional work. I personally have not always been okay with that, especially given the fact that I think to some degree I wanted to be a very good product manager. And I just felt that, dividing my interest in that way means I am giving less time to building my product skills. But I attended a conference recently, last year. It was virtual. And I think it was organized by some kind of women in tech group. And it was pretty much, discussing about the hardship of the year and everything. And this was the year that George Floyd died, right? So, I'm like, okay, of course that's a hardship. So I'm sitting at this conference and I'm listening in, and they're talking about ageism in tech, which it's a good thing. That's always a big thing, sure. There's obviously the stress for women in the fact that a lot of women are homemakers. So when your kids can't go to school, you have to take care of your kids, take care of the home, and do your job. So another very big issue. And there are all of these other things. And I did not hear any racial conversation at all, which sometimes is intentional, right? I don't expect a group of non-Black people to know how to talk about this stuff, right? But I do expect that if you're advertising yourself as an inclusive space for women in tech, you should know that in your group, there would be some Black women in tech. And in that moment, I just realized that if we don't tell them, if we don't do this work, it might not get better. It really might not, because I don't think, I think they want to do it. I think most people, again, I might just be a very optimistic person, but I do think most people want to be good. And I think most people understand that it was a hard year for Black people everywhere. I felt that they just didn't know how to best address this. And so I guess for me, that was my turning point. It was like, well, yeah, we're going to do this work. And I would say I've been very lucky. I've been very blessed. I am in a very supportive team. So my manager, my director, they all know what I do. And it's not seen as an added work on top of my job. It's seen as part of my job. So in addition to Africans at Microsoft, I also am the diversity and inclusion champ for my organization at Microsoft, which consists of at least 500 people. So there is a lot of work that goes into having these key discussions, planning these key programs, talking with other groups within cloud and AI at Microsoft, because each group has their own, D&I champ, and we try to work together and bring programming that works across our teams. Again, trying not to duplicate work, right? So I would say, I don't think it's everyone's experience, but that has definitely helped in terms of finding ways to rest. because I know that I'm well supported. So I don't feel pressured to work 40 hours as a PM and 40 hours as a DNI expert, right? So yeah, how do I rest? How do I find time to rest? Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that one. we would rest when we die. JK. But yeah, no, I do definitely take time to rest. I think that's, I mostly work greater than 40 hours, but I try not to make it the norm. So after work, I could be hanging out with friends. I have a good friend group here, and I'd often hanging out with them, games night, food, etc. I'm actually going over tonight to finish Insecure because the new season comes out on Sunday, and we started rewatching that.
Oh wow!
So we're gonna finish the last episode tonight, and then tomorrow we move. Oh yeah. And then weekends, I try to chill. I grab brunch with some people or go for a massage, which is covered by Microsoft. So it helps. So yeah, we find the time and try to make the best of it, I guess, is my summary for how do you rest. Yeah.
There is rest in that, so no, good to hear. Okay, so before we finish up, I'm quite interested in what your future plans are and where you see your career going next.
Yeah, so it's often hard to say because you don't want to jinx stuff, but at the same time, you want to speak it in existence. So I'm kind of torn. But I would say that something that is really important to me right now is representation in tech. And for me, what that looks like is being a C-suite exec at a top tech company. And if you think about the fact that another woman, another Black girl can look up and see someone that looks like them sitting on these positions, that in itself is impacting a lot of people. And then the other angle is you realize how much, I don't want to use what power, but power you have in terms of shaping the future of tech when you're the one making those key decisions. Like you can look at a company like Microsoft, like how much it has evolved since Satya took over. And even just the work culture. So internally, you're changing people's lives by evolving and improving the work culture. But externally, you're changing people's lives by having a say in where a company like that is investing, right? Like now there's a lot more emphasis on inclusion, on accessibility, on representation. So I think that's the two-part reason for why I think that is a future ambition for me. But of course, I have tons of interest. I think that I don't know when I'm going to leave my current role, but I imagine that something I do next would be probably the metaverse space because that's really popping off right now. And I have had interest in that for a while. There's actually a startup in Vancouver called the Ethos Lab that I guess, work with from time to time. And we are trying to build some kind of metaverse for youth, especially unrepresented youth. So it's a space that I'm very passionate about, and I think that could be an interesting next move. I'm also interested in like smart stuff, smart technologies, smart cities, smart water, which I was like, wow. So that's I don't know what the next thing is, but like you said, take a step and watch how the momentum drives you, right? So
yeah,
we'll see.
Exciting.
It's exciting, and I just love that because Black women building the future is what I'm all about.
Honestly, like I could talk about this metaverse stuff a lot, but if you think about the fact that this is the future of the web, you need these voices in right now. But anyway, I'm gonna just stop there.
I know, just to kind of emphasize your point, I think the metaverse, when you think about it, we live in a universe, and the metaverse is a digital universe. So literally from the molecular level to everything that will be built and experienced there, you're building a new world. And it's like, who do you want building this world? Do you want one kind of person, or do you want every kind of potential person represented in the building of that world, so that the world actually is fit for purpose for everyone? Yeah,
Exactly. You hit that right on the head. Yep.
Okay, well, I'd love to keep talking about the metaverse, but I think we've come to the end of kind of our core questions. But just to say, it's been amazing speaking with you. So inspired by things you've said. So excited for you and your career kind of going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you
for taking the time to speak to us. Last but not least, I'm sure after this, when people have listened to kind of the amazing things you've said, they'll want to kind of connect with you, obviously on a kind of professional level. So what social media platforms are good to kind of connect with you and follow you on?
On a professional level, I would recommend LinkedIn. So the name is Jessica Udo, UDO, U for umbrella, D for dog, O for orange.
Well, Jessica, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us at the tech table. And thank you for being our guest today. And best luck with the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today and listening to this episode of A Seat at the Tech Table. You can connect with us on our social media platforms. Just search @SistersInTech on Twitter and Instagram, and check out our website www.sistersin.tech to see what we've got going on. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, and we'll bring you the next episode soon.